Irish. I teach Chinese studies in Catalan in Barcelona. I've lived in China, I've lived in many places, and have a regular, long-standing contact with China and Chinese studies. I would like to begin with an image. Some of you who know me already know this image, but I'll begin. I first went to live in China in the 1980-1981 academic year. I arrived in Beijing on the second flight from the United States in a Chinese airline, a 24-hour flight. Got to the hotel after midnight. In the morning when I got to go to have my breakfast, I saw this image outside my room. Chinese map of the world. My first automatic reaction was to think, that's not right. And my second reaction was, well, of course, it depends. And that's one of the most important things you need to know about my classes. They're about the point of view, the place from which you see things. Europeans and Americans are accustomed to seeing the Atlantic Ocean in the middle of the world. So China is off on the margins. East Asians are used to seeing the Pacific Ocean in the middle world, and we, Europeans, are lost here. And that's the reality of the world today. The majority of world trade takes place in the Pacific Rim, in the Pacific Ocean. Another image. You all recognize these as chopsticks. And if you don't use them yourself, you probably know that they're used in East Asian culture. But the reason why they're used in East Asian culture is very interesting. And the story I'm going to tell you comes from the Encyclopedia Britannica. I haven't invented it myself. When we set the table in China or in East Asia, we have a bowl to put the rice in. We have chopsticks. We have a ceramic spoon, which won't burn your mouth because the soup is hot. And in the middle of the table, there are lots of little dishes with different ingredients that everybody shares. Now, I asked the Europeans and the North Americans, what do you put on a table when you prepare for a meal? You do eat. You do put things on the table. What do you put on the table? Out loud? Fork, knife. We bring weapons to the table. We bring weapons to the table because we have to cut things at the table. The reason why in East Asia you can eat with chopsticks is that you don't have to cut anything. Because it's not just the chopsticks, it's the whole cuisine, it's the whole way of preparing things. Everything is sliced in the kitchen before it comes to the table. And this was a strategy used by the cultural experts, the technocrats of ancient China thousands of years ago, to develop a protocol which would prevent the warriors from bringing their weapons into the banquet hall during diplomatic negotiations. So that if they began shouting at each other, they would just shout. They wouldn't pull out their knives and kill each other. And this use of a cultural development, such as how food is prepared and how it's eaten, is a very important aspect of East Asian culture. You could say a similar thing about how Zen Buddhism used the practice of martial arts to stop people from using martial arts by turning the practice into a ceremony rather than an actual thing. Now, the trousers I'm wearing are called chinos. That's because the Chinese emigrated to the United States to help build the railroad. The Irish did the same thing. The Chinese began in California, the Irish began in Rhode Island, and they met in the middle. This tweedy-looking jacket for a professor that I'm wearing was made in China. And the shirt I'm wearing, some of you might recognize, is Shanghai Tang. I don't know how many of you know what Shanghai Tang is, but Shanghai Tang is a high-fashion brand coming out of East Asia. I read recently that there was a documentary on American television about a family who tried to celebrate Christmas without having anything from China. And it was impossible. Most of the furnishings of the house disappeared. Most of their clothes disappeared. The toys they wanted to get for their children for Christmas cost $90 if they were made in Mexico, and they cost $5 if they were made in China. There's a constant presence of the country, which, as we've heard, is now the second most large economy in the world. My backpack. The brand name is Eastpak, one of the leading brand names. But the name of this model is Luan. It means disorder. Written underneath it in English is chaos, which seems to be, from the point of view of Eastpak, something which might encourage young people, including myself, to buy it because we want to be free, etc. But the concept of chaos and disorder in East Asia is the worst social problem there can be. And the answer to chaos is harmony. This is the way the world was from the year 1 to the year 1700. India, the blue line, and China, the yellow line, between them shared more than 50% of the world's wealth from the year 1 to the year 1700. Western Europe, the United States, and Japan were all below 3% of the world's wealth. That's a long period of time for Asia to have dominated the world. I want to take the year 1600 as a starting point. In the year 1600, a Jesuit from Catalonia named Antoni de Montserrat died in what is now called India. He had been invited there by a Muslim emperor of the Mughal Empire, along with many representatives of other religions and philosophies, to debate freely in an academy after the Muslim Empire of the Mughal Empire had decreed religious freedom. Antoni de Montserrat was the first person to draw a map of Tibet, and he wrote a book in Latin about his travels through India and Tibet. In the year 1601, an Italian Jesuit named Matteo Ricci and a Spanish Jesuit named Diego de Pantoja reached the capital of the Chinese Empire with the permission of the Chinese emperor in order to set up a mission in a culture in which free and open debate about different ways of thinking was tolerated. In the year 1600 in London, a private business firm called the East India Company was founded, which would have a lot to do with tea later on. And in the year 1600 in Rome, the Italian philosopher Giordano Bruno was burned to death by the Inquisition. Now I ask you, in the year 1600, which part of the world was tolerant and open, and which part of the world was aggressive and violent? Because that's not where you see the world today. What happened after that? Between 1820 and a projection toward the year 2030, China and India fall drastically to less than 5% of the world wealth. Western Europe and the United States fly up and dominate the world's wealth. That period corresponds to industrialism, industrial revolution, and European-American aggressive imperialism. And now it's changing. China and India are coming up. Europe, Western Europe, and America are going down in terms of the percentage of world wealth. So what happened in that period between 1820 and, say, 1978 or 2000? That's the subject of my two courses. One of them deals with it from the point of view of political philosophy and political science, international economic policy and foreign relations. The other one deals with it from the point of view of literature and the arts, film and opera. But the basic themes and the basic periods are still pretty much the same. This is a painting from the end of the 19th century. It is inspired by a drawing by Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm of the recently united Germany, in which we see a figure with wings and a fiery sword, which for those of you who don't know Catholic iconography means the Archangel Michael, who drove the fallen angels into hell and Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, addressing a series of women, all of whom are dressed as warriors, beneath a cross. And he's saying, people of Europe, protect your most sacred possessions, and he's indicating something which is coming. There's a cloud with Buddha sitting on top of it, and beneath the cloud there are hordes and hordes and hordes of Asian people coming to take away the sacred possessions of Europe. This is what was later called the Yellow Peril, the idea of the Yellow Peril. And it demonstrates that in that period of aggressive Euro-American imperialism, racism was a very important factor in international relations. Here we have two scenes from the opera Madama Butterfly. The bottom one, we can see a kind of oriental garden. In the top one, we can see Butterfly and her son who's carrying an American flag. That has a lot to do with the story of Madame Butterfly, if you don't know what it is. And then we have a quote from the Japanese foreign minister in the year 1895, referring to a Japanese victory over China in a war, in which he says, "The effects of our military successes against the Chinese enhanced our position and our influence in the eyes of our countrymen and observers abroad, and permanently disabused the Western powers of the degrading notion that Japan was little more than a superficial imitator of civilization. No longer did they conceive of Japan as simply a beautiful oriental garden." The arts, literature, films, etc., are reflections of ideological battles and also ways of carrying out ideological battles. Now, the organization of both subjects is the same. There's 20% for a book report about one of the readings associated with the course, 20% for an oral presentation, depending on the number of students, will be individual or by group, 20% for participation, and a research paper or a term paper, not really a research paper, a term paper worth 40%. And all of the information, all the readings will be on the blog sites for the two subjects. Thank you very much.